Hello there. Welcome to Weekly Lit. This is the introductory episode of an approximately weekly look at literature. Oftentimes it'll be filmed in my study, which is Weekly Lit, hence the pun. I've got a desk lamp, but the rest of it's dim, Weekly Lit. So I'll be doing some readings, sharing some thoughts on literature, looking for your thoughts. We're going to start off with the American master, Ernest Hemingway, because of the PBS documentary just aired this week. I thought it'd be appropriate, and my striking resemblance to him also factors into that decision. So we'll be back with a quick excerpt from Ernest Hemingway. In 1925, and Hemingway was still in his 20s, and it's a story about the protagonist being Joe Butler, the son of a jockey. Starts out in Italy. The action moves to Paris, but the reason I chose this selection in Hemingway this week was, of course, because of the Hemingway documentary that was on PBS recently, and highly recommended. But I actually have three excerpts. The first one is from A Farewell to Arms, and it's a very short excerpt in a scene when the scene where Helen Ferguson comes out and is distraught, and there's the line, "I'm not crying," Ferguson sobbed, which just makes me laugh every time I read it or hear it, because it's just that concision and directness, and maybe a little bit of a tribute to, I think it was H.L. Mencken that had the line, "Shut up," he explained. And just that sort of a shot in there it's kind of a throw-off line, but shows just Hemingway's ability to have that direct kind of language that was pretty groundbreaking. And the second is apocryphal, so I like to think that it's true, but upon a wager, of course, most people have heard this story, but upon a wager of whether he could tell a complete story within 6 words, Hemingway came up with "for sale baby shoes never worn," which is not only a good answer to that wager, but a devastatingly wicked gut punch of an answer that shows his thought and humanity and what he could convey in a modicum of words. And again, apocryphal perhaps, but I like to believe it's true. So this excerpt that I'm going to read, the featured event, is from My Old Man, and we'll begin mid-story. San Siro was the swellest course I've ever seen, but the old man said it was a dog's life, going back and forth between Mirafiore and San Siro, and riding just about every day in the week with a train ride every other night. I was nuts about the horses, too. There's something about it when they come out and go up to the track to the post, sort of dancy and tight-looking, with the jock keeping a tight hold and maybe easing off a little and letting them run a little going up. Then once they were at the barrier, it got me worse than anything, especially at San Siro, with that big green infield and the mountains way off and the fat wop starter with his big whip, and the jocks fiddling them around, and then the barrier snapping up and that bell going off and them getting all off in a bunch and then commencing to string out. You know the way a bunch of skins gets off. If you're up in the stand with a pair of glasses, all you see is them plunging off, and then that bell goes off and it seems like it rings for 1,000 years, and then they come sweeping around the turn. There wasn't ever anything like it for me. But my old man said one day in the dressing room when he was getting into his street clothes, "None of these other things are horses, Joe. They'd kill that bunch of skates for their hides and hoofs up in Paris." That was the day he'd won the Premio Commercio, with Lantorna shooting her out of the field at the last 100 meters like pulling a cork out of a bottle. It was right after the Premio Commercio that we pulled out and left Italy. My old man in Holbrook and a fat wop in a straw hat that kept wiping his face with a handkerchief were having an argument at a table at the Galleria. They were all talking French, and the two of them was after my old man about something. Finally, he didn't say anything anymore, but he just sat there and looked at Holbrook. And the two of them kept after him, first one talking, then the other, and the fat wop always butting in on Holbrook. "Yeah, you go out and buy me a Sportsman, will you, Joe?" my old man said, and handed me a couple of soldi without looking away from Holbrook. So I went out of the Galleria and walked over in front of the Scala and bought a paper and came back and stood a little way away because I didn't want to butt in. And my old man was sitting back in his chair looking down at his coffee and fooling with a spoon, and Holbrook and the big wop were standing, and the big wop was wiping his face and shaking his head. And I came up and my old man acted just as though the two of them weren't standing there and said, "Want an ice, Joe?" Holbrook looked down at my old man and said, slow and careful, "You son of a bitch." And he and the fat wop went out and threw the tables. My old man sat there and sort of smiled at me, but his face was white, and I looked sick as hell, and I was scared and felt sick inside because I knew something had happened, and I didn't see how anybody could call my man a son of a bitch and get away with it. My old man opened up the Sportsman and studied the handicaps for a while. And then he said, "You got to take a lot of things in this world, Joe." 3 days later, we left Milan for good on the Turin train for Paris, after an auction sale out front of Turner Stables of everything we couldn't get into a trunk and suitcase. We got into Paris early in the morning on a long, dirty station the old man told me was the Gare de Lyon. Paris was an awful big town after Milan. Seems like in Milan everybody is going somewhere and all the trains run around somewhere and there ain't any sort of a mix-up. But Paris is all balled up. And they never do straighten it out. I got to like it, though, part of it anyway, and say it's got the best racehorses in the world. Seems as though that were the thing that keeps it all going, and about the only thing you can figure out is that every day the buses will be going out to whatever track they're running at, going right out through everything to the track. I never really not go Paris well, because I just came in about once or twice a week with the old man from Maisons, and he always sat at the Café de la Paix on the opera side with the rest of the gang from Maisons. And I guess that's one of the busiest parts of the town. But say, isn't it funny that a big town like Paris wouldn't have a Galleria, isn't it? So, that's the excerpt that shows, the reason I chose that is that it shows one of Hemingway's theories or concepts about how he transmitted ideas, which is the iceberg theory of not necessarily telling you everything that's going along, but letting the reader connect the dots. You know, of course, idea with the iceberg is that, only 1/8 of it is visible above water. And so that's just a little scene. And toward the middle of the story, there's following action with a tragic end that I'll leave you to track down and read yourself. But it just has that iceberg concept of Joe walking away buying the paper, and then you get a pretty good sense of what's going on. And it isn't directly spelled out, though. As direct as the rest of the language is, it's just implied by the actions and the dialogue, and you're left to make the connections. And so we'll be back next week with a different author. I'm going to jump around, cover a lot of ground. The ground rules for this are that there are no ground rules. This is just my attempt at a humble channel to share some thoughts about literature. So we will be covering great works, classic works, poetry, and even some genre fiction when I think that the writers transcend the genre well enough to deserve attention. And the reason for this is just to kind of create a channel where I can share some thoughts and then get your comments to the extent people want to do that. So you can like, mock, subscribe, share, and maybe we can get some thoughts going back and forth with comments and potentially have guests in the future and things like that. But it's all kind of free form. So I'm not going to be bound to any sort of restrictions or anything like that. If you want to, hold me back to any sort of guidelines or restrictions, get your own channel that won't be as good as this channel. I'm just predicting that. So anyway, until next time, we will be pursuing another, actually, a colleague of Hemingway's, at least with writing within the same time frame, and somebody that I think is even surpasses what Hemingway did with the language. Hemingway, is one of my favorites, but perhaps you can figure out who next week's author is going to be, who is one of my absolute favorites. And anyway, until then, thank you for your time. Read harder and cut. Do I say cut?